Hello. Thank you for coming. I'm Elizabeth Bennett. I'm Director of Community Engagement at Indiana University South Bend. And we're delighted to be hosting this month's pop-up university here at the South Bend Museum of Art, and this beautiful space with this incredible exhibit by one of our professors, Zack, who's also an artist, filmmaker, and is responsible with some of his colleagues for this amazing film and exhibit. I want to mention that there is a sign-up sheet on the refreshment table. Help yourself to food at any time. We'll also be out after the talk. And you can sign up to hear from us about future Pop-Up University talks. These are talks by IU South Bend faculty about their teaching, research, creative activity, and we do them as a way to really gather with members of the broader community and to have conversations about areas of mutual interest. So we're just delighted to have you here with us, and we're going to learn a little bit about our speaker. Yes.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Lisa Schaefer, and I'm IUSB class of '89. I also worked at IUSB.
Yes, you did.
In the early 2000s, so I'm very intimate with, and I'm a neighbor of IUSB, so you're on my walk route. So I'm all IUSB all the time, and I appreciate the fact that we were picked to be part of a pop-up university, but also to host Zack Shrank and his work here. I also want to mention a couple things that are coming to the museum itself. We will have Around the Bend starting May 25th. We have over 275 local artists that will be shown, and I'm sure many of them are IUSB grads. Here at the museum itself, I think of the 8 of us, 6 of us are IU South Bend grads. So we're really integrated into this community and our local IU South Bend. But keep in mind that we're a free museum and open to the public, and we're coming to our exhibitions frequently throughout the year. So please keep us in mind when you're looking to spend some leisure time enjoying art. So I want to introduce Zack Shrank. Zack Shrank is a ninth generation Hoosier, sociology professor, and director of the Center for Sustainable Future at Indiana University South Bend. He regularly teaches social theory, consumer society, and environmental sociology courses. In 2020, he co-directed the documentary Big Enough, Small Enough, South Bend in Transition. In 2023, he directed the film Liminal, Indiana and the Anthropocene, which won the Indiana Spotlight Award at the Heartland International Film Festival. Liminal, Indiana and the Anthropocene, is an aerial photography and film project that illustrates our state as a microcosm of this new planetary epoch. It was conceptualized and arranged by Zack Shrank, produced with drone cameras by Aaron Yoder of Indiana Aerials, and accompanied by a feature-length meditative film with original score written by Fort Wayne composer Nate Ustesh. I'd like to welcome Zack Shrank, and again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. This is an interesting experiment for me because I've never had my work in a gallery with a film, and people come hear me talk in a gallery, so this feels like a bit of a departure, but also very cozy and exciting, and I'm happy to share with you this project that I worked on for 3 years and finished a year ago, and we're at a place now where, and I know I've talked with some of you about this film, or you've seen it. It toured around the state, along with many of the pictures that you see here in different galleries. But having it here back in South Bend, kind of where we started the premiere of the film 1 year ago, is exciting. And so what I want to accomplish tonight in this talk is give you a bit of a backstory of what the project is. We'll talk about what the Anthropocene is and what I'm trying to pull together in terms of my interest in this concept related to the planet and the environment, and then my focus on trying to showcase how we can see it here in Indiana. So the talk is called Indiana Transformations, Human Impacts on the Hoosier Landscape. And I'll kind of do some background of what the concept is here, and then we'll move into more of how we chose the sites for these images, captured the images, and then put together the film itself. Okay, so how is it that we can see the Anthropocene? How can we visualize it? This was the origin of the project. It was the question that kind of drove everything for me. And the reason I asked this question, without specifying what the Anthropocene is right now, is it's this immense, massive, strange, peculiar, surreal thing. And what I wanted to think about, and what I was thinking about, is how do we see something that is so monumental in time and in space as something like the Anthropocene, and how can we see something that's planetary in scale? I think the nature of a topic like this kind of defies the usual way in which one makes sense of the world around them. We're used to seeing the world in both our lived experiences or in our travel or what we're seeing on TV. But when something is happening on a scale that is planetary, and when Earth system scientists are saying this is something that's been happening for decades, if not centuries, and it forces us to recast our sense of what history is and maybe rethink what our future is going to be, like, what does that even look like? What does that mean? What does it feel like? So the challenge then that kind of got this moving in action is my attempt to imagine how we could see something that is not a normal type of object or process that we might be accustomed to. So, what I'll do here, this is probably really small text you might not be able to read, and that's okay, but I'm going to share with you some formal definitions of this concept of the Anthropocene, this thing that has captured my attention for a long time now, that I think is personally maybe the most important multidisciplinary topic that can pull everything together. But what is the Anthropocene? The Anthropocene, the formal definition of this is it's the period of time when human activities have had an environmental impact on the Earth regarded as constituting a distinct geologic age. Or another way of thinking about this, and it emerges out of geology itself, a way of thinking about the human impact on the planet that has shifted us out of the epoch that is known as the Holocene. The Holocene is this epoch within a larger era of the Quaternary that has existed for about 12,000 years. And within that, you have about a 3 million year Quaternary period where you have glacial movement, interglacial movement around 25 times over a 3 million year period. So it's a way of kind of carving up Earth history in defined times based on characteristics of the planet, the biodiversity that exists in that particular time, and the way of thinking about how we classify that shift. Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of these. There we go. All right. So another way then of thinking about the Anthropocene itself is that it's not just like environmental degradation. It's not just climate change. That's something I want to emphasize, is that the Anthropocene is this umbrella concept that really is reflective of changes in, and not just these 5 things, but in atmospheric composition. So that's where we think of climate change. So I would say that climate change is a feature of the Anthropocene. But it's also a feature of land transformation through deforestation, mining, damming, and the built environment. It's a feature of biosphere degradation, the change of the types of animals that not only live and exist, but the change of invasive species, or the change of extinction rates over time that are caused by human impact on the planet. The Anthropocene reflects changes in permanent novel entities, things like chemicals or plastics or radionuclides, things that exist in the soil and the air that are not natural but are a product of human activity or industrial activity. All these things have various different impacts within ecology or within the Earth itself, but reflect a larger process of humans doing things that what we now know, when I say we, I mean the scientific community, earth scientists, is that we are in the middle of seeing indelible alterations to the planet. Like, the things that are happening are permanently going to be imprinted to some degree in the geology. Now, to what degree is up to some debate. Some of the things that we think that are permanent, like even entire cities, within 10, 20 million years might be completely squashed and flat, and you wouldn't see any residue of this. But many other things will be embedded, fossilized in the geologic record. Landfills will be smashed and fossilized in the geologic record. Radionuclides will have the same type of imprint in the geologic record, in the same way that the asteroid that struck 66 million years ago has an iridium line across the planet that you can still detect today. So the idea is that the Anthropocene is this indelible impact, but it's also a recognition not just of forecasting millions of years out that we'll be able to see the human impact of the planet, but a recognition of our dominance right now today over Earth systems, and forces us to recognize our place and capabilities on a planet through deep time. Okay. I'm not going to talk much more about the technicalities of the Anthropocene, but it's an interesting news story that forces us to think about Earth in deep time. So this chart is probably too fuzzy for you to see. This is from the International Chronostratigraphic Union, and this gives you a sense of Earth's 4.5 billion year history, how it's carved up in different epochs, and then different eras, and then different eons. And with this type of stratigraphic chart, we can begin to visualize and to imagine humans in a powerful, and as powerful actors transforming the Earth in the same way that previous epochs reflect powerful forces or forcings that changed the Earth, whether it was a change in the tilt, or whether it was a change in the type of animals that were living on the planet that were having an impact on the terrestrial biota, or if it's a change because of a comet, or variations in different cycles of the planet. One thing we know is that each one of these periods and epochs and eras is defined by a change in the rock record. It's imprinted in the history of the planet itself. And so we can then think of ourselves, here's the Holocene, the Anthropocene is then this kind of staging ground that we're in now that, if ever formally recognized, we then say, okay, we have changed the planet. And we're as powerful as many of these previous forcings, some of them going back hundreds of millions of years. So this is just a nice way of visualizing this, and this is where I'm starting to think of how do we begin to visualize the magnitude of something. Another is, I like this kind of cartoon chart that takes us back through different eras and epochs, the Holocene, the Pleistocene, the Pliocene. Some of them you might be familiar with, the Jurassic period, the dinosaurs, and then recognition of certain extinction events that happen because of changes in atmospheric chemistry or changes with asteroids hitting the planet. But all of them are defined by a different type of life and different type of eras that are reflective of temperature or reflective of conditions. And so here we are today. You can imagine this, kind of the strata of the rock record at the top of this with our way of life kind of impacting the planet as we are now. So I want to take then a moment before I go any further, and I'll ask you a couple questions. This can be rhetorical, or you can respond. But when we think of having an impact on the planet, what do you see? What do you see imagining human domination of the planet? It's this kind of concept of the Anthropocene. How do you see it on the biggest and the smallest scales? Where is it? If it's planetary, it's kind of everywhere, right? But where would you point to it? Or where would you say, oh, there's an example of that? What does it look like? How would you describe it? What does it feel like?
Concrete.
Okay, that's a great example. Concrete is poured all over the planet, has a massive carbon footprint, and the amount of carbon that we pour has transformed many natural environments. Of course, it's really good for us. It's durable, and we can build things with it. We can drive on it. There's nothing natural about it anywhere else in nature, right? How else might you think of, either in abstract terms or in definite terms, seeing the impact of the planet?
That just the number of creatures we caused to go extinct.
Okay, so maybe
Overhunting or through removing their habitat, the carrier pigeon, for example.
exactly. So maybe thinking about animals that are going extinct now or that we have forced into extinction in the past, a reflection of our impact on biodiversity. So we're thinking of animals and what animals don't exist anymore, okay? How else might you be thinking about this in your head? Because there are 1,000,001 ways to think about it. But this is the challenge of how would you go about trying to then kind of capture it.
It's kind of concrete, just roads.
Yeah, right.
So it might be decorative, it might be concrete,
Yeah.
bridge. roads.
Yeah, a road that, you've kind of scraped the earth down, then covered it over so nothing else can grow, right? That's a very human thing.
Monocultures of crops.
Right, we don't see that in nature anywhere, right? So in order to grow a lot of food efficiently, we use monocultures, and monocultures also require a lot of inputs and pesticides and maintenance and care, because there's nothing like that in nature that can grow without symbiosis. So monocultures don't really look like nature. They're our way of kind of imposing on nature what we need. Good. Yeah, so these are all ways that you can imagine seeing it. The challenge then next is, how are our perspectives limited in how you see human domination of the planet? This is a little bit more of a challenging question. It was one that I kind of wrestled with. It'll be something that I also kind of cover here a little bit too, so yeah.
Well, I'm thinking in comparison to like your images that are aerial shots. I mean, like a normal person doesn't have an aerial view of the area around them. So we're literally limited by our perspective visually.
That's right.
And then I would just also say, like, mentally, any single person is limited by what news they watch, what books they read, how informed you are on a global scale, because you're trying to picture things on a planetary level.
That's right. Yeah, so just where we are walking around, we have just our kind of terrestrial view. There's things that we can't see if we had a different vantage point. Or depending on what it is that we are bringing, information we're bringing in, we might not be aware of all of the way in which scientists are detecting our impact on the planet. Yeah.
Time scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Humans are so short in the history of the Earth. We think that what we're doing now is huge because for us it is, but for the Earth it's a tiny little wink of time.
Yeah, I think I like to think about, like, in all of Earth history, if you take it back, you collapse it on a football field, 100 yards, all of human history in the last 10,000 years would be the length of the filament in a light bulb, right? So all of that Earth history that you saw in that strata has been building up just to this point, and so we are such a fraction of a visible point in Earth history, although we do have an outsized impact compared to other small fractions. Yeah. So yeah, deep time is hard to, it limits our perspective, because our time horizon is relatively short compared to Earth time horizons. Yeah. Yeah, so there are a lot of challenging ways of seeing something like the Anthropocene because it's just so big, and how it could be defined or how it could be characterized, or what limiting factors might make it difficult for us to see something. I like to think of it sometimes like the parable of the blind and the elephant. There are so many different ways that you can imagine seeing the Anthropocene, and it's really a constellation of transformations, and each feature is interconnected in one way or another to other features and something larger and more comprehensive. But while concrete and roads and time and all these things are correct, there are also so many other ways that we're impacting the planet too. And so the idea of the Anthropocene is that we have to take kind of a different look, or we have to take off our blinders, or we have to be able to see something beyond just one appendage or one part of the elephant, and kind of change our perspective. Okay, so now I'd like to conceptualize the Anthropocene. And by the way, this is the film Liminal. We just decided we'd kind of leave it on in the background, partly because we have another number of images from the project in here, but this will give you a sense of, while I'm talking of kind of the different types of locations and ways we were trying to demonstrate certain changes over time in Indiana. When I think of the Anthropocene, not just in what it is geologically or scientifically, but in the kind of social or political, economic categories, I like to think of the Anthropocene as a manifestation, because it literally means the era of humans, right? The era, new era of humans. And it manifests from underlying forces of the modern global economy, the way we live today, the way we have been living for several decades, if not generations beyond that. And like I said earlier, it's not just climate change, which is one of many Earth systems. There are other Earth systems too. There's the biosphere, there's the lithosphere, there's the cryosphere, and all of these things are also changing at a very quick pace. And so what that means is that the Anthropocene is everywhere, and we're embedded within it at all times. It's ubiquitous, from the smallest scale of nanoplastics and microplastics in the air or in the water, to the soil, to the largest scales of planetary systems that we can detect and measure. Would it be weird if I spent a minute and read an excerpt from Elizabeth Kolber's book, Under a White Sky? I think she does a really nice job of conceptualizing the Anthropocene. Yes?
So just a quick question.
Yeah.
Do we know who coined this phrase, and when did people start using the phrase?
It was coined in 2001, I believe, by a man named Paul Crutzen, a geologist.
So this is very recent.
Yeah.
Than to think of it. I mean,
there have been different terms that evoke the Anthropocene throughout the 20th century, but in terms of it being kind of projected into, or escaping the scientific community and projected into the popular culture or just different ways of thinking about it, it really is within the last 20 plus years.
so just the last 20 years, and just to make sure I understand, are we talking the last 12,000 years is what they're saying is the Anthropocene?
The Holocene began with the end of the Ice Age, and it's the time when the glacial mass has receded north, and we have very temperate kind of upper latitude landscape, very defined seasons, very hospitable and stable for not just life, but human life in particular. It coincides with humans inventing agriculture, beginning to settle. The Holocene is a time of abundance and a lot of biodiversity, and perfect for humans to develop civilization. The idea of the Anthropocene is that the Holocene has probably ended. It started about 12,000 years ago, and the question is, perhaps it ended when? That's actually up for debate. The geologic community that is tasked with deciding that recently rejected any timeline. They can't agree whether it started in 1945 with the first atomic testing, or in the 19th century or the 18th century with Industrial Revolution, or with the first contact of Europeans in North America, or maybe 10,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture itself. Humans have been changed in their environment for a long time, but then the question is, when was that change impactful enough to define an actual shift in planetary systems that you could say, encased in the rock record, we could say that right there is when we were no longer in the Holocene. So that's still being debated. So there's the scientific terminology for it, but then there's also more of the popular imagination, a recognition that even if we don't officially recognize, if geologists don't officially recognize that we've left the Holocene yet, the meaning of the Anthropocene is still very real. That we can actually measure human impacts on the planet in a very accelerated and dramatic way. So is it okay if I read for you one page? I didn't know if this would be appropriate or not, but I thought she's going to say this better than me, and I love this way of thinking about it. So here's how Elizabeth Kolber describes it. That humans should have dominion over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth is a prophecy that is hardened into fact. Choose just about any metric you want, and it tells the same story. People have, by now, directly transformed more than half the ice-free land on Earth, some 27 million square miles, and indirectly half of what remains. We have dammed or diverted most of the world's major rivers. Our fertilizer plants and legume crop fix more nitrogen than all terrestrial ecosystems combined, and our planes, cars, and power stations emit about 100 times more carbon dioxide than volcanoes do. We now routinely cause earthquakes. In terms of the sheer biomass, the numbers are stark staring. People today outweigh wild mammals by a ratio of more than 8 to 1. Add in the weight of our domesticated animals, mostly cows and pigs, and the ratio climbs to 22 to 1. In fact, as a recent paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences observed, humans and livestock outweigh all vertebrates combined with the exception of fish. We have become the major driver of extinction and also probably of speciation. So pervasive is man's impact, it is said that we live in a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene. In the age of man, there is nowhere to go, and this includes the deepest trenches of the oceans and the middle of the Antarctic ice sheet. that does not already bear our Friday-like footprints. An obvious lesson to draw from this turn of events is, be careful what you wish for. Atmospheric warming, ocean acidification, sea level rise, deglaciation, desertification, eutrophication, these are just some of the byproducts of our species' success. Such is the pace of what is blindly labeled global change, that there are only a handful of comparable examples in all of Earth's history, the most recent being the asteroid impact that ended the reign of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Humans are producing no analog climates, no analog ecosystems, and a whole no analog future. So I thought that was a powerful way of conceptualizing something beyond just the geology itself. Another way of conceptualizing the Anthropocene, and in a way that I think is most compelling, is sometimes referred to as the Great Acceleration. This is an idea that starting in around 1945 to 1950, we see an acceleration of global interconnectedness of the materials economy in pursuit of infinite growth. The materials economy being oriented around this process of extraction, production, distribution, consumption, and disposal. All of those things are happening faster, at a bigger scale, and connected on a global, in a global marketplace. And so that acceleration, when we think of it that way, is a defining recognition that not only are humans impacting the planet, but the most dramatic impacts have actually happened within our lifetime. So here's a way of looking at that conceptualization. So what I'm going to show you now are several charts or images or ways that, getting back to that question of how would you see something this big, or how would you recognize this? This set of data and charts was actually developed by a geologist named Will Steffen, who just passed away earlier this year. He was from Australia, kind of a pioneer within the community that studied the Anthropocene. And he and a team collected data of global processes, looking at both socioeconomic trends and then also Earth system trends. And starting again about 1950, post-World War II, when humans begin to really expand their footprint on the planet in a global industrial capacity, we see this repeated kind of hockey stick approach of acceleration with population, with investment, with primary energy use, fertilizer consumption, water use, damming, transportation, telecommunications, paper production. And then corresponding with this, we see a growth in things like carbon dioxide emissions, nitrous oxide emissions, methane emissions, stratospheric ozone depletion, surface temperatures, oceans acidification, on and on and on. The dramatic impacts are really most recognizable within the latter half of the 20th century, and all of these are only accelerating even more so today. So, while when the Anthropocene may or may not have started is up for debate, there is no debate that we are in a unique time that has no corollary in Earth history. When you combine all of these together, this is all of Will Steffen's data here, going back to 1750 up through the beginning of the 21st century. So these are all those same measures just plotted on a chart here. We see this interesting story. And so this is how I conceptualize the Anthropocene. It's a way of seeing this zooming into something foreign and unknown in all of Earth history. Another way of conceptualizing it is sometimes referred to as planetary boundaries. There are a group of Earth system scientists who argue that the Earth is governed by around 9 or 10 distinct planetary boundaries. And this concept is useful because the idea of the boundary is that we shouldn't exceed or surpass them, and which would eventually create a collapse or a shift in that Earth system itself. Some of them are quite alarming in terms of surpassing biosphere integrity and novel entities and climate change. Others we have started to pass or beginning to pass in terms of land system change, freshwater change, biogeochemical flows, ocean acidification. We might be in a more safe operating space when it comes to stratospheric ozone depletion. Thankfully, that was a change within our lifetime, or atmospheric aerosol loading. But again, this type of graph helps us think about the Earth and the Earth system in a more comprehensive way than just climate change, right? It says something about our actions in many different ways impacting Earth systems. I think a challenge in recognizing these concepts, though, also then reflects the fact that these transformations are, while they're abrupt in all of Earth history, getting back to this kind of time analysis, they're happening within the blink of an eye in all of Earth history. Many of these changes are happening at a scale that is beyond a human lifetime or approaching the length of a human lifetime. And so one of the challenges of recognizing dramatic changes and transformations is sometimes referred to as shifting baselines. So recognizing these phase shifts out of one state into another, and these transformations in some of these previous slides that I just showed you, while they're really dramatic and stark in the chart itself, it's challenging for us in our ability to make sense of these changes over long stretches of time that surpass living memory. So here's a little cartoon that, if you know now, we get a regular visitor, the polar vortex, who comes to visit us about once a winter now. The polar vortex is because of a change in Arctic temperatures forcing air pressure down. It's not really supposed to get that cold, but historically it actually did get much colder. But for a lot of us, that brutal kind of cold temperature, if we imagine it compared to today, it feels like things are getting much colder with the polar vortex. But actually winters are getting warmer, and it's harder to recognize this. In the same way, it might be hard to recognize slowly which birds are disappearing or which insects are disappearing over time. And of course, future generations might not know what has already been lost. Okay, we doing okay? Am I boring you to death, or am I okay? All right, so I promise I'll get to what this is and how it corresponds here in a minute too. Last kind of weird concept that I connected with in thinking about this project was then, as I'm conceptualizing what the Anthropocene is, I began thinking about it in terms of what a philosopher named Timothy Morton refers to as a hyperobject. And so I'm going to talk about what a hyperobject is here. So often the difficulty of seeing and truly feeling transformations is because of the magnitude of their opacity. And so this reflects the dynamics of a hyperobject. So what is a hyperobject? A hyperobject is an obscured force or structure beyond our understanding in the normal terms of scales of time, size, or field of view. However, they can be detected and measured. For example, a magnetic field can be detected and measured with a compass, but they are not possible to see entirely. They might be invisible to us, or just impossible to see in their entirety. They're just too big, or they're too weird, or they're too dispersed over place or time. So some examples of hyperobjects, I've split into two here. You can think of a hyperobject as structural itself, like a hyperstructured force. Capitalism would be a hyperobject. We know it, we feel it, we're part of it, but you couldn't know capitalism in its entirety. Earth's magnetic field, a revolution, often we don't recognize until it's actually over, or even global warming itself. Too big, phased over too long, having too many dispersed impacts, it's challenging in terms of how we normally recognize something or an object. Another example is in distributed conditions. So you can think of all the styrofoam that has ever been made as a hyperobject, or all the coal that has ever been burned, or all the concrete, getting back to your example here, that has ever been poured, or every iPhone that was ever produced, or all the microplastics on the planet. That is something. It is a thing. It's just dispersed in a way that we couldn't categorize it as a normal object. Increasingly, in a world dominated by humans, that humans are the major driver in changing things, leaving our footprint, our debris, shifting our climate, recognizing that as an object of human impact is challenging, just because there's never been something like it before. So, you don't have to read all this. The way Timothy Morton describes this, and why I think the Anthropocene is a hyperobject, is that they defy traditional modes of thinking about reality, and they humiliate our cognitive powers. They're disorienting in their shift that sends many people reeling into superstition, polarization, and denial. And hyperobjects speak to the immense structural forces all around us, even inside of us, that we cannot see with our own eyes, but strive to comprehend through data and computers. They're also connected to us in 4 different ways. They're viscous, that is, they're kind of stuck to us wherever we go. Wherever you are, you're part of it, right? Capitalism, wherever you go, you're part of it. They're non-local, its effects are globally distributed through a huge tract of time, and it forces me to experience them in unusual ways. They're phased, you only experience pieces of it at any one time, and they are interobjective. It contains all kinds of other entities, but it isn't reducible to them. So these are dynamic, unfolding, ubiquitous, and inescapable features of reality. And we are creating a lot of these things. Some of them are human systems, some of them are things that we're doing that are shifting planetary systems. But they're real, they're measurable, and this is what Earth scientists are measuring today. So when we connect hyperobjects in the Anthropocene, visualizations of hyperobjects, like the Anthropocene, become necessary for us to then begin to grasp their magnitude and meaning. You might not be able to photograph capitalism in its entirety, or you might not be able to take a picture of all the styrofoam that's ever been made, or you might not be able to capture the Anthropocene in its totality. But visualizing it through charts and graphs, or different illustrations, or video, or photography become the method of gripping you and recognizing, I see, this is an effect, this is a manifestation of this. This is why a local historian at Notre Dame, Julia Adney Thomas, argues that confronting the Anthropocene is both a scientific and humanistic enterprise. We have to bring the humanities into this to understand what this actually means. And telling the story requires new approaches and new methods that integrate different frames and time horizons. But global problems on a planetary scale, by nature, can feel ironically far away or difficult to perceive because of their ubiquity and their massive transformations. By nature, we might feel climate change, right? We might feel a heat wave or a polar vortex in the winter or strange weather, but it's phased and we can't feel it in its entirety. So global warming always feels like it might be in the future or it might be somewhere else. Deforestation always feels like it's somewhere else. So we're always just picking up little snippets of it. And there are blinders then to understanding planetary problems. So I'm going to show you a couple of illustrations that have helped me see these hyperobjects, or these on a large scale here. If we wanted to consider how much oil or how much coal or how much liquefied natural gas is burned every year, we could take all of that that's dispersed around the planet, put it in a place like Dubai. Here's the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. And we could see that every year we burn about a cubic mile of oil or a cubic mile of coal. Think about how gargantuan that is, right? Like a cubic mile, that way, and then up. That's a lot, year after year after year, and all of these are either staying at the same rate or increasing. They're not slowing down enough to make a noticeable difference. So here, you just visualizing this illustration, you can't see the hyperobject, but it gives you a sense of conceptualizing it. Or imagine all the crushed stone and sand and gravel on an annual rate compared to one World Trade Center. Right? Gives you a sense of the magnitude of what we're doing collectively as a species in mining and transporting these aggregates and different types of crushed rock. Or we could look at, as Elizabeth Colbert mentioned in this text I read for you, a shift in anthropogenic mass compared to biomass. Now this is probably too small for you to see. I'll zoom in a little bit here. But if you look at all of the stuff that humans have made, concrete, bricks, steel, aggregates, asphalt, metals, it surpasses global biomass, right? We are now a planet where more of the stuff on the planet is stuff that we've made than the stuff that nature has made here. So I think these graphic illustrations of human-made materials help us then see that this is what the hyperobject is. Okay, yeah, there's not a place where you could see all this in one place, right? But if you put it together in an illustration, you have that capability. Same goes for global biomass of mammalian life. We see that that domesticated mammals, cows, chickens, pigs, goats, humans surpass all of the amount of wild biomass invertebrates on the planet. And it's not even close, which is a strange thing to think about, right? Humans and our cows vastly, not only outnumbering, but in volume and biomass, nature itself or wildlife. Here's another way of kind of looking at this, a distribution of mammals on Earth, where you have 4% of the global mammal biomass, things that live in nature, then humans comprising around 34% of the biomass, and then our livestock comprising the other 62%. Nothing like this has ever happened in world history, that we know of at least. And if you stop and really think about that, it is surreal, it is odd, it is strange. It's a reflection of the Anthropocene. So, what does the Anthropocene look like? Kind of back to my original question here. And one of the guiding moments when I realized, oh, I like this idea of a project. I was reading a book by Amitav Ghosh, and he's a literary scholar who writes about climate change and our impact on the planet. And he stated in his book, he can write all about how climate change in the Anthropocene is shifting his native land of India and all of the impacts of hurricanes and changes forecasted in the future. But he said, what really comes down to it, the Anthropocene must be seen in pictures. That's how you're going to have to see it. So we can start with some graphic illustrations here. Here's a global snapshot of land transformation. Okay, so the bright green here, these are places where the natural land has been transitioned into cropland. The lighter green is where you have less cropland, and then where you don't see any color, it's either arid or too cold or a desert or a jungle. But here you can see on a global scale how humans have basically shaved the earth and replaced it with cropland, right? And now the majority of terrestrial land that can be accessed is used in this capacity. Another way of kind of illustrating this is imagining with a composite overlay of agricultural phosphorus and nitrogen runoff into watersheds. So you have cities and urban places and then farms, and then the fact that one of the primary shifts in planetary systems are biogeochemical cycles. All of this phosphorus and nitrogen moving into the Mississippi River, being dumped into the Gulf of Mexico, leading to, with satellite imagery, an actual view from space of dead zones, right? Phosphorus and nitrogen that essentially depletes the ability for life to exist in these wide swaths of the Gulf of Mexico and other locations around the planet every year. I think these types of images are effective in helping us get a sense of this is what the Anthropocene looks like. It's not it in its an entirety, but it's an example of an expression of it. I think another very effective way is looking at time-lapse. If we want to consider the impact of humans on the planet, a time-lapse of deforestation can be one of the most. So, my approach then was trying to think of a way of how we could see the Anthropocene in Indiana. That became my question. So far, there have been a number of projects that have looked at this question, but they've all been global in scope. Two of the most important photographers and videographers that have tried to kind of take a visual snapshot of what the Anthropocene looks like are Edward Bertinsky and George Steinmetz. Both are long-term aerial photographers. And I think the essence of aerial photography and visual sociology kind of reflects this quote that I came upon by Don DeLillo recently, is that the biggest secrets are the ones that are spread open before us. And what both George Steinmetz and Edward Bertinsky have achieved is not only getting up in the air to document what the human impact looks like, but taking you on a showcase around the globe to give you that. So I'm going to show you just a few of these images that inspired me for my own project. So this is an image from George Steinmetz. This is in Houston. This is an oil refinery, and it gives you a sense of both in the landscape and the horizon, the extent of that transformation. Not only in a transformation, but also in a defined way, part of the petrochemical economy. This is an image by Edward Bertinsky in the Atacama Desert. These are lithium mines that are used to extract from the earth to put into batteries. And this is what it looks like from the air. Totally different from when you're on the ground. Also beautiful in kind of a strange way in terms of its aquaness and its green and its blues. but something that if you were hovering over the planet would immediately recognize that this is different, this is unfamiliar, this is a new approach to extracting or making things for our civilization. Here's another image from Edward Burtynsky, and this is from his project Anthropocene, the Human Epoch, which was both a book and a movie, a documentary. This is the largest surface mine in the world in Germany with the largest mining machine on the planet. This doesn't really do justice, but this is like the size of a house right here, a massive excavator. And this is a landfill full primarily of clothes in Nairobi. This is a picture taken by George Steinmetz from an airplane. This is a pivot irrigation system taken from an airplane by George Steinmetz over the Great Plains. A unique and kind of beautiful pattern of agricultural, monocultural development, but also wholly unnatural in its shape and form and look. So if you see these images, you can kind of come to the conclusion that the Anthropocene is somewhere else, right? It's always across the world somewhere. All these images feel distant and disconnected to us. And so this project, the Liminal Indiana and the Anthropocene, or the Indiana Transformations Project, emerged as an attempt to see expressions of the Anthropocene as a hyperobject in a new way. And instead of casting the eye globally or in collecting data to demonstrate the development in graphs or in charts or illustrations, I sought to see it here. That became my challenge. I'm from Indiana, and my roots extend back here, and I became interested in this question of how Indiana had changed. During the same time, I learned that my 8th great-grandfather migrated to Indiana in 1793, and I began thinking, wow, how different would the state have been at the time? It was before it was a state, and how impactful had those changes been over time? How could we see that? So first came this recognition of I needed to understand how extensively the state had been transformed from its natural environment. So here's an illustration that gives you a sense of the type of landscape that my 8th great-grandfather would have inhabited. He moved about right here, I believe, in the Batesville area, and what Indiana looks like today. So Indiana was actually once a dense hardwood forest, one of the densest hardwood forests in North America, but also accompanied by one of the largest wetlands in North America outside of the Everglades. And of course, the beginning of the Kankakee wetlands actually kind of begins where we are here in South Bend, extending where the Kankakee River is today and terminating in Kankakee, Illinois. But here you see that the state of Indiana was really a forest, a wetland with some dry prairie interspersed, right? Today, Indiana is, no surprise, a state of primarily in the landscape you can see in agriculture, the yellow here, cities, Indianapolis, South Bend, some remaining forests, Hoosier National Forest, and in southern Indiana, a couple of dots here, but also a complete disappearance of our wetlands in terms of the scale of what it was 200 years ago, or even 100 years ago.
The image on the left, right here, is that?
This image is from, I believe it's 1792. I believe, I'll have to double check. But
close enough.
Yeah, it's in the end of the 18th century. And this most recent image is from, I believe, right around the year 2000, and looks pretty similar to today. So that transformation, it was gradual, happened over generations, but a relatively complete transformation that began to pique my curiosity is that, okay, this is what the Anthropocene looks like in terms of this illustration. How could I begin to identify places in the state that reflect core ways of the materials economy that we would recognize as feeding into this global economy that earth scientists are saying are channeling or forcing the Anthropocene? So I challenged myself to think of Indiana as a microcosm of this global thing. So if something is planetary in nature, by default, wherever you are, there has to be part of it there. Maybe not as intense as it is somewhere else, or there's variations, but that became my challenge. I was like, all right, let's see if within the boundaries of Indiana, I could identify core nodes, and that's what each one of these dots are. They're identified as primary expressions of some of the underlying conditions of the Anthropocene and the materials economy as a hyper object, as something that put together in total would give you a sense of what it looks, feels, and how it's changed. So the perspective from an aerial drone is something that, based on my own inspiration from George Steinmetz and Edward Bertinsky and some other aerial photographers, I thought would be a really effective way to do that. And so we used a drone to capture these nodes in the structural socio-environmental interface in the larger Anthropocene field. And I like to think of it as the same way as like a magnetic field, right? A magnetic field with a compass, you can kind of get a sense of where that field is flowing. And by looking at the state, and I started this project in April of 2020, and wouldn't you believe there was really nothing to do for a while. I spent a few weeks looking at satellite imagery of the state. And I thought, where can I kind of use my compass to see nodes of the Anthropocene field, these like visible expressions of this. And so slowly in that kind of emerging time of the pandemic, identified originally 55 places, and then what you see in this film are 45 locations in these images that we kind of whittled down. But our goal was to do this statewide, to identify in as many different places as we could, different attributes of the Anthropocene. I haven't checked what time it is. How am I? Okay, 6:53. So, again, getting back to this quote by Don DeLillo, the biggest secrets are the ones that are spread open before us. And my thought was, well, we can hover over this big secret and tap into and see the open secrets unfold. So I connected and partnered with Aaron Yoder. He is a South Bend native. He runs a company that's called Indiana Aerials. Wanted to come tonight and tell you about his process, but he is currently operating a drone in Nebraska right now. He does work with the wind turbine industry, helping them identify problems with their turbines or their blades, and takes the drone up there so a human doesn't have to keep going up and down these turns. So he spends a lot of time in Iowa and Nebraska. And I met him in 2020 and was captivated by some of his drone imagery, his aerial imagery around northern Indiana and Chicago, and proposed this idea to him. Like, I had been looking around the state, I would love to capture some of these aerial imagery in the same way that we were seeing other aerial photographers capture it around the planet. And he immediately was excited about this. So here is Aaron, here am I. We are at, this is the Empire Quarry, just south of Bloomington, Indiana. It's actually just adjacent to the Bedford Limestone Company. This is the quarry that the Empire State Building was extracted from, block for block in 1932 or 33, I believe. And what's really cool about it is if you stand back here, you can kind of imagine the Empire State Building just being lifted out of this particular quarry here. And so Aaron used a DJI Phantom 4 drone. It's a 20 megapixel drone, and this is how he would do it. He'd get in a little chair and put this little hood on so he could, in the daylight, see what he was directing his drone to do. And here's the drone itself. And over about an 8-month period, we jumped around the state when we had time, and it was a great activity during the pandemic because we were able to do it in isolation and then be outdoors. So we visited 55 different locations, and Aaron would capture a mixture of imagery and video. And then we had all of this imagery and video to work with, and then spent the next 2.5 years editing it, assembling it, turning it into a film, turning it into a set of photographs, but all of them oriented around kind of following the sequence of the materials economy in many of the same ways that I tried to present in this set of illustrations to you. So the goal of this project is that we wanted to document the sequence of the materials economy within Indiana as it corresponds to the Anthropocene in all regions of the state. The images images depict extraction or how extraction is either coal for electric power generation or minerals to serve as an input for infrastructure are distributed for energy and production. And this process feeds into a global supply chain that ultimately consumes and disposes products in a rapid cycle. And our hope was that by revealing the massive industrial footprint and environmental transformations that exist in an often overlooked place like Indiana, that these images will help the public conceive of the entangled nature of the Anthropocene within their immediate surroundings. And so we created a website. I'm not going to take you to this right now. This is where we kind of dumped our first set of images, and then we decided we wanted to sequence them. So we started with this idea of what did Indiana look like originally? The film opens up with this too. You open up, you see a vast, verdant, lush forest. This is the Hoosier National Forest in Brown County, lofted with a drone here. And from this perspective, it looks like it's endless, right? And this is what the state looked like in its entirety 200 years ago outside of the wetlands. Then we began thinking, all right, what's the next phase of the material economy? So we started looking for extraction. We found some of the, some very large open pit coal mines. And so here you see bulldozers extracting from this open pit mine, and the emergence of the Anthropocene coincides with a lot of the extraction of fossil fuels that are burned up to power modern civilization. What's interesting about Indiana is that while it's not a major coal state like West Virginia or Wyoming, it's a significant coal state. Indiana has extracted more than 900 billion tons of coal with an estimated 900 million, not billion, 900 million tons with an estimated 57 billion tons of coal still in the ground. So these coal seams open up, all this coal is scooped out, it's filled back in, and then that process just keeps moving. And some of these coal fields in southwestern Indiana have been operating for 40 or 50 years continuously. We looked for some of the largest sand and gravel and limestone quarries we could find. Here you can see a loader, really tiny here. I like the strata here, you can see too, filling up a lot of aggregates and limestone that are used for mixing for concrete or for asphalt or for gravel. There's a lot of crushed stone that comes from Indiana, and Indiana mines each year massive amounts leaving behind these massive quarries that are truly, I would say, competitive with some of the largest quarries on the planet. We also have 16 coal-powered generators in Indiana, and each one of them have these massive mounds of coal that are adjacent to this. A lot of this coal came directly from a mine just maybe 15 or 20 miles away. Indiana generates the majority of its electricity with coal. It's home to some of the largest coal power plants in North America, and all of them contribute not only to global warming, but especially down in Evansville and kind of along the Ohio River, some pretty nasty air. This is down by Madison. Again, we're thinking about carbon emissions here. These are continuously burned, and Indiana has a carbon dioxide emission rate of approximately 27 metric tons per capita. That's 8th in the nation, but if Indiana were its own country, our per capita emissions would only be surpassed by Qatar and Trinidad and Tobago. These particular chimneys in Madison at the Clifty Creek Power Plant are almost 1,000 feet tall and are among the top 50 tallest smokestacks on the entire planet. We also refine a lot of oil. This is up near Whiting. These are just fascinating to hover over and look at. They're like these labyrinths of tunnels and tubes, and they look completely, almost like a circuit board from the sky. And this particular refinery is responsible for, it's very productive in refining a lot of the tar sands from Alberta. This particular steel complex in East Chicago, just adjacent to Gary, was the world's largest steel complex up until about 20 years ago. The largest is now in China. This is still the largest steelmaking complex in North America. Steel is an incredibly energy-intensive process to make, but absolutely essential in our modern civilization. There are, as of right now, no very efficient green ways to make steel on a massive scale. Some of these pictures are also, by the way, on the walls here too. When we think of impacts on the planet, perhaps under-recognized is the impact of industrial agriculture. Concentrated animal feeding operations look really strange from the sky too. These are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calf hutches, and they're used to grow calves that are weaning from their mother. But of course, in the same area, you see massive manure lagoons in the sky. You see large industrial agricultural systems that look quite peculiar in terms of the surrounding landscape. There are massive distribution hubs. One of the largest train hubs in America is actually in Elkhart. Norfolk Southern has 72 tracks, and it's pretty mesmerizing if you hover over and just watch the trains move in and out for a while here. It's also a Superfund site. Indiana has the highest concentration of manufacturing jobs in America, and it is the second largest automobile production state other than Michigan. It is the only state in America that has assembly plants for all General Motors, Honda, Toyota, and Subarus. Every Highlander you see is made in Indiana. All of the Subarus are made in Indiana. All of these Silverados here are made in Indiana. So it's just a massive industrial space for automobile production. And then, of course, at the end of all of this, eventually goes to the dump. This is a scrapyard here in South Bend, and this is one of my favorite images just because of this metal mountain with a truck being tossed on top of it. The film that you're watching is a 55-minute sequence, start to finish, starting from kind of primeval, old-growth forests, walking through that same process of the materials economy. All 45 sites are there. Oh, here's that truck that we just saw, actually. We call this the saga of the truck, and the truck being pushed onto this mound here. The end of the film kind of takes you to this point of waste, and then wraps up with this idea of the detritus of society with ruins, either in Gary or in different. There's actually an abandoned, unfinished nuclear power station in southern Indiana that was pretty interesting to put in this film here too. So the film here is 55 minutes, and what was unique about this is it's a non-narrated film. The idea is that we wanted conceptually to share what the goal was for the project, but everything here is, very quietly, here's some music, was, the score was recorded by a Fort Wayne graphic designer and composer who had rescored some other old films that I had met in the past. And the idea was we wanted to create in the accompaniment of these images a way of seeing, without narration, a process that was art forward. So the music, the flow, the style of it is meant where you can sit, kind of reflect upon that change, let it wash over you, but it's not really didactic. You don't come away with me telling you what to do or what the solution is. It's more of a way of getting back to that original question of how might we see the Anthropocene where we live? And this is my attempt to do that. And so earlier, last year, this is Nate, the person who scored this. He did a few live scores with this. I think we screened it in 12 places around the state. This is at Heartland Films Theater, and had an opportunity to share it with a bunch of communities around the state. And if you are interested, the book for this project will be published in February of 2025 with around 185 images that walk through the same sequence of the materials economy. And it'll give you a sense of kind of the three-part way of trying to channel this: imagery, music, and moving images. Yeah, I've never done something like this before. The whole process was quite strange, and honestly, I'm not sure what you think about it. But it was one where I think coming into the pandemic, it captured my attention, and it was a way of almost, I felt compelled to make it because it could be made. But the story here is one where each person might take something different. I don't have a message other than, look what this all looks like, and it's comparable to things that are happening all over the globe, and it casts a new light on what it looks like to live in Indiana. It helps us to see that where we are is a part of this thing. The other thing I would take away from this is that a film or a project like this could be made anywhere. anywhere on the planet could have their own story of the Anthropocene, the Canadian Anthropocene, South African Anthropocene, the Australian Anthropocene, and they'd all be different in terms of how they're slotted into and fit into the global economy. And there would be unique and surreal and surprising ways to measure that, to capture that. And so that's what this was. I think it came out of an interest in my own history and my deep roots in Indiana. It came out of some boredom from the pandemic, and it came out of a desire to do something creative in a way that I might be able to share it with different communities around the state, connect, tell a story in a new and unique way. So yeah, that was my project. That was it. And I don't know, it's about 7. I'm probably done talking now. I've gone over. So I am happy to take questions. I know we have the space until 8 to talk with you, to answer questions about anything. But thanks for being here, and isn't this cool to be in an art museum and talking together here? So thank you so much for being here. So what do you want to do now? You want to sit here? You want to get them talk? You want me to answer some questions? What would be the best?
Just have a few questions, yeah.
So I've got 2 questions. The first one's very brief. The music composer didn't get a CD at the end of the book?
No, but it's a great question. He is going to share the music in some format, digitally for sure. The process, he will probably release the music either on a record or a CD, but it'll be his thing.
Cool.
So I won't have any connection to that. But that is his plan. He is hoping sometime, maybe by the end of this year, to have that. So hopefully you can, if you want to listen to it on Spotify, you can.
So then I have a real question.
Yes.
It looks like you made as an artist, did you make a decision to not show human figures? Because everything is what we did, and we did that. But I've counted, and there's basically 4 people. There was the kayakers, there's the dude back in the RV out, and and then there's in Santa Claus, Indiana, or wherever the
people riding on the roller coasters.
That's pretty much the only people we actually saw. That was a choice?
Well, yes and no. You do have to be careful about hovering over people and taking their images. So we were very concerned about privacy. Every image you see here was actually legally captured by FAA standards. So he's an FAA certified drone pilot. Every image here is not in restricted airspace. Indiana actually has unique laws. You are, as of right now, if you are an FAA certified drone pilot, allowed to fly over critical infrastructure. So we were able to fly over power plants. This is an abandoned nuclear power plant down by Madison, Indiana. And so he was very well versed in knowing what his rights were for this. But he was also very aware of, you have to be at a certain altitude, and if you want to take pictures of people, they actually have to be at a certain altitude. Stream it. Anybody else? Yes. What's your name?
My name is Michael.
Hey, Michael.
I'm curious, was the music composed as the images are being taken, or?
Great question. So Nate's story is, we finished the entire editing process. It was basically almost entirely locked. Handed it over to him, and his whole thing is, he's like, I just want to watch it and I'm going to kind of track my feelings of what I'm seeing and write down some initial gut impulse, and then went back with that, kind of sketched out a timeline. So he worked with this editing, we edited it together for about a year and then sent it on to him, and then he worked on this process for maybe 8 or 9 months. But that was all then secondary. So he wasn't part of the filming, he wasn't part of the first rounds of editing. He really just looked at it as an opportunity to see what his feeling was. And he describes what he has attempted to do with the music. And I know it was really quiet so you couldn't hear it, but he almost saw himself as a character. And there's some emotional quality. Sometimes it's really uplifting. Sometimes it feels a little like when you're going through these steel yards, it feels kind of hollow, so there's like creaky noises. And so he tried to kind of create and evoke a sense of emotion. He said that was really fun to be this hidden character. But yeah, he did it all kind of peripheral to the core work itself. Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I was curious, could you see a second life for this film with narration?
Yes, definitely. That's I don't know about this specific film, but I think, so there are other films about the Anthropocene that are narrated. I didn't feel like, for whatever reason, I liked the feeling of kind of being hidden behind the scene and just letting the imagery and the feeling speak for itself. This is the only kind of direction right here at the beginning, just kind of pointing you towards a concept. But I certainly think, and the book itself has captions and each chapter opens up with some text. So we saw the book as this companion that gives a little bit more explanation to that. But as far as the film goes, yeah, I think either Second Life or just a different type of project that tries to capture some of the same themes, but is more informative in terms of what you're seeing, why it's included, what it represents, and what this concept means and why it's important. Yeah. Elizabeth.
You mentioned video and images. Is there sort of a still shot that he would sort of switch the drone to take the still shot, or are they screen captures, or how do these type of beautiful still images that you see here get captured?
Yeah, so there's a switch. Yeah, so he would run the drone for a while. He would have a shot that he wanted to create, and then every image is a switch from video mode to photographic mode, and these are still shots. They're not stills from the video, so they're a separate set of imagery. Yep. Yeah.
So it's 45 locations at this point, right? Mm-hmm. I wonder if either for educators or for community engagement across Indiana, it might be interesting to have the website name the 45 locations and invite students to say, pick 2 of them and write the voiceover.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, so that image that you saw with India with all the dots, that'll be included in the text here. So it'll give a reference of where all these locations are, and in the book it has the locations mentioned. So that's actually a really interesting thing, is to imagine I wouldn't be responsible for the story, but people maybe who live there, who have a history or know more about it than I do. I like that idea. Yeah, that's really cool. Maybe you can give me some more ideas. I like that. that's cool. I mean, I would kind of get to the idea of it not being just my project, but a statewide project that gives some...
A digital humanities project.
Yeah, great idea. Thanks, Kim. Yeah.
That's great. So when you toured the state showing the film, was the response the same everywhere, or did you see differences across cities?
The response was pretty similar. The uniform response I tended to get afterwards when I would talk to people was, and most people were from Indiana, had been there for a long time, they said something to the effect of, this really felt like a different way to see the state. Like it feels so, it feels like Indiana, but also not at the same time. So it was a perspective shift. I think a lot of the crowds that came to see it were already plugged into community events and were pretty eager to see these things. So I didn't really get much criticism, or I didn't get a lot of pushback. People were really interested and receptive. But in general, the same story was kind of like, oh, okay. Indiana has this whole other way of seeing it, and I guess every other place does too. That seemed kind of be almost like every event somebody would say something to that effect. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was my other question, which is, after making this film, do you feel like your own perspective on the state that you have these deep history in and deep roots to has shifted in some way?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, because I spent so much time looking at all of these images, and and in each one of these images has 30 or 40 kind of other pictures from different points of view, so kind of sifting through and editing, I became very familiar with this storyline. But then there's also a recognition that these are really concentrated spaces, right? Like there's the whole state as a whole mainly just kind of looks like this, right? So you had to be very intentional about finding this kind of dense, concentrated expression of where industrial activity is happening, or waste is happening, or entertainment's happening. So I guess I came away from it thinking that, if you were just to hover a drone anywhere over the state, it wouldn't be necessarily all that exciting. You have to really try to interstitially figure out where that all works together. But what did come away is I was pretty shocked by both what I would say is that the state has a lot of natural beauty, and even in the we described some of the, this is really pretty, but some of the imagery of the film was like hideously beautiful. It was like, wow, this is really ugly, but there's an element of kind of an aesthetic. It's aesthetically pleasing too, and I don't know if that's kind of like a Rust Belt thing or just a post-industrial landscape, but there's a strange quality of beauty that I think I took away that I didn't have before, because I grew up near cornfields and I never thought they were all that pretty, but then hovering over the sky, like, oh wow, it really is kind of like waves of water, and this is a soybean field, but yeah, I don't know. I think landscape that I'd seen over and over and over again, I did find some beauty in it in a new way.
I had kind of a variation of the question regarding the images, which are beautiful one after another, even if some are beautiful in kind of odd ways, of like the trash middens and things like that. Is there any concern that the beauty of the images and the care with which they are presented undermines the message a little bit?
Perhaps, yeah, and partly because, well, I don't know. I don't think I didn't get the sense after kind of touring around with this last year that the audience thought there was a sense like this is really pretty, but seemed to get it like, oh, this is really a shift of how I'm seeing it, but. I don't know. I think in order to make it captivating and surreal, there has to be a quality to keep the attention. And it is possible that somebody could say, oh, this isn't so bad, or it looks really pleasing, or this is enjoyable to watch. But I don't think that something that's profound and disjointed and creating change necessarily has to be ugly. I mean, I guess part of that reflects my thought of so much of the Anthropocene is a product of all these good things that we get to do that have these bad kind of spillover effects down the road, And so I didn't want anybody to walk away from this film feeling bad or guilty, because like we all participate in this.
This doesn't make you feel utterly depressed?
No, because, I mean, yes and no, but I don't feel like I am entirely responsible for this. We all are.
Yeah.
And so it's this thing is like, this is how the world works. This is how communities make money. This is how we're plugged in. This is how our economy grows. And we're probably unaware of just how much we contribute to that too. And so there is an appreciation of the scale of some of this. Like, wow, you really do have to do this to the planet in order to live this way. But then on the other side, we didn't try to hide anything either. So we're not trying to like.
No, you did not.
Yeah. So it's both it's a story that this is how the world works, but we're not going to try to hide it. But we might as well look at it, and it might as well captivate us in the process, because maybe it'll capture attention. Honestly, I don't know. All I know is I think these images kind of speak for themselves in some ways, and as long as you can keep your gaze, then maybe that's the point. I don't know. So maybe mesmerizing in a weird way is the word. Yeah. Anybody else? Nobody? Anybody? Yes, Erica?
Are you familiar with John Green?
Yeah. I wrote him and asked him if he would review.
I
said, I think this needs reviewed, but he didn't respond.
He did.
No.
Your question earlier, Jonathan, about the term. John Green is an author who lives in Indianapolis, very popular author. And he did a whole series during the pandemic called the Anthropocene Review. And he pulled the most obscure, silly
kinds of things. He reviewed them and he'd come up and say, 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
Aspirin.
Yeah. Kind of
This is what it does. This is what it, all kinds of things. So
kind of a whimsical
I wondered
approach.
if you had crossed
Totally.
paths with him.
I was hoping I would meet him. I invited him to a screening in Indianapolis. I wrote him. I said, "Would you want to review this film?" And turns out I think he has a lot of other stuff going on.
He
So.
probably does.
You have
You
to
know.
have your agent ask.
He's got a movie coming out.
That's right. So, but that did cross my mind. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. I don't know if I talked too long or anything, but I appreciate you staying and happy to talk some more.